Welcome back to Heritage and Hope Ministries. I'm your host, Alex, and this is my brother James here, who's joining me as well. And today we have another Sunday Law Update. Before we go into this update, though, we want to let you know about an exciting opportunity that is coming in North Carolina here. In a very short period of time, we're going to be holding a seminar in North Carolina. Take a look at the trailer about this upcoming presentation and make sure you go and register so that you can stay up to date about this conference.
Wars without end, assassination attempts, witchcraft is destroying our children, families torn apart, rampant atheism, a country that once called itself
one nation under God,
barely recognizable.
We have to bring back our religion. We have to bring back Christianity in this country.
I'd like to see the town be a Christian town. I'd like to see the state be a Christian state. I'd like to see the nation be a Christian nation. And I'd like to see the world be a Christian world.
That's why we get called. Well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes. You want God to come and overtake the government. Yes.
There are people alive today who remember what it was like to live in a country that observed the Sabbath.
I mean, the left would if they could look at the law books from the founding of our nation, they would say, well, that's a Christian dictatorship.
Will God save America? Come find out April 3rd and 4th, 2026. Register today on willgodsaveamerica.com.
So like the trailer said, make sure you go and you register so that you can stay up to date. But James, you know, there's been a lot going on in the news. The Iran conflict is breaking out into full swing. We know that there's been a lot of voices pushing and clamoring for the rise of a return to religion. And actually, I saw a statistic where Bible printings, Bible sales are actually up. There's this general swing back towards religion. And I've actually been saving a number of clips that are specifically talking about this religious revival that is taking place.
More than any time I can recount, people are talking about American identity and figuring out what it is that unites us. But I want to say something here. The only thing that is truly served as an anchor of the United States of America is that we have been, and by the grace of God, we always will be a Christian nation.
But some churches are seeing a 30%, 50%, or even 70% increase in the number of converts and also the number of people going to church every week. To support this exciting renewal this morning, I'm pleased to announce that on May 17th, 2026, that we're inviting Americans from all across the country to come together on our national mall to pray, to give thanks, and we are going to do something that everyone said, like, that's tough. We're going to rededicate America as one nation under God. You know, a lot of people...
Young Americans are leading a Christian revival across the country. Bible sales increasing over 40% since 2022. Religion app downloads surging nearly 80%. That increased since 2019. And Christian music Spotify streams up 50% from 2019.
Church attendance among young people has been going down for generations. That's not news. But with Gen Z and millennials, church attendance has actually doubled since COVID. Why? Why a revival of interest in spirituality with young people? I went to America's biggest church, Lakewood Church in Houston, to find out. Watch.
A lot of people your age don't go to church.
It's true.
But it seems like it's turning around.
We have a lot of people who maybe they were going to church when they were younger because their parents said to do so, and then they fell out of faith, and then now they're coming back and regaining their footing and rebuilding the foundation.
You know, we have a lot of information about where we are in time, but I want to actually mention to our viewers a little bit of an answer to prayer we had recently, too, in giving this message. So, actually, it was a couple of weeks ago that you and I were joined with Eric here in the studio.
Hey, it's Alex here with Heritage and Hope Ministries. I'm with my brother James, and we're also with our good friend Eric from Daniel 12:3. Eric, you guys make the Great Controversy sharing cards, is that right?
That's right. And we have some other designs as well, and they've turned out to be extremely popular.
Yeah, you have a QR code here on the back for the Great Controversy sharing card where people can listen to an audiobook version and look at videos of the Great Controversy. But, we're planning on partnering together for Washington, D.C. May 17, we are planning on going to Washington, D.C. with a filming crew, and we're going to try and bring some of these cards. Now, we need some help raising funds specifically to print about, several thousand of these cards to take with us up there. So we're going to leave a link where you can go and donate specifically to this cause so that we can get the message out there in Washington, D.C. on May 17. Aren't these great resources?
Yeah, they're wonderful. There's a version that I'm hoping we can get printed perhaps that talks about lessons on history specifically for America's 250 years celebration. So make sure that you go to Heritage and Hope to donate. And we also want to plug here, Daniel 12:3 is a part of OCI, and you can also donate as well to help get these cards to travel. They're wonderful cards, and he's been selling out very quickly, 50,000 batches, so we need additional support to get them to go further. Mm-hmm. And for those of you watching, we have been actually helping to promote the Great Controversy card, which has a wonderful protective sleeve, and you can get it without, but it's this wonderful card that has a QR code, and it's got the audio Great Controversy. So we gathered together because Eric needed funds to print 1 million cards. He was blowing through the 50,000 card orders. They were being ordered like hotcakes. So we gathered together to pray, and within 2 days we got a message that everything had been funded plus help with shipping for 1 million cards.
And it's a really high quality card.
Yep.
This isn't like some cheap, paper card. This is like credit card material. And so you can actually take this, and there's actually a number of different designs if you go on the website. And you can order them not on our website. We are not the ones who are doing this. We're not paid anything to promote these. But it's over at AdventistSharingCard.com. Again, that's AdventistSharingCard.com. And we're going to take some of these with us up to Washington, D.C. for this National Day of Prayer on the National Mall. And we're really excited about that. And we hope that a lot of people are going to come up there, a lot of Adventists, in order to help pass out literature, because we know that there's going to be a couple different ministries actually who are gathering large volumes of the actual book, Great Controversy. We're going to bring 10,000 of these Great Controversy sharing cards. So we're going to need help passing them out. We're not arranging lodging or transportation or anything else, but we are going to be giving updates on social media during the May 17 event, the National Day of Prayer on the National Mall. We're going to be there on the National Mall, and we're going to have these, and we're going to hand them out, and we're going to need help because I don't think I can hand out 10,000 by myself.
Yep. Okay, but we're not the only ones out there pushing our book. There are other people pushing it and their book, and that would be Turning Point. There's a letter going out, and I found this very interesting here. They're highlighting, by honoring the Sabbath, Charlie lived out a powerful message. God, you are enough, and because you are enough, I need not carry the weight of the world that was never mine to hold. It's interesting to me that Turning Point is really taking this message about the Sabbath. But Alex, when they say Sabbath, do they mean the seventh-day Sabbath?
Well, Charlie probably would have said that, but I don't believe that those who are now in charge of Turning Point are going to go anywhere near as strong that direction. We've actually already come out with a video where we talked about the book Stop in the Name of God by Charlie Kirk, and kind of discussed how it was not the swing and a hit for the seventh-day Sabbath that it should have been.
Yeah.
So there was certainly some issues there. So when you're seeing mass mailings like this, it's not... Now, does it help get the conversation started? Yes. We can certainly use it as an opening wedge. If somebody's talking about it, you can say, hey, about that topic.
Well, other people are taking notice, and somebody actually sent me this next video by an influencer, Christian influencer, with 415,000 followers on Facebook. And now, mind you, this guy is not a Seventh-day Sabbath keeper, okay? He thinks, Jesus is my Sabbath, and I don't need to keep any particular day, and all the usual unbiblical excuses, okay? But listen to this little excerpt of his thoughts on what's taking place.
There's a reason why they are promoting this book right now. There's a reason why there's an uptick in this conversation about the Sabbath. And my friend, I'm telling you, it is darker than you can imagine. And my friend, I'm trying to warn you that that is just one deception of many that's falling on this world right now. I don't care about your opinions or my opinions or your feelings or my feelings. I care about what does the Word of God say. That is the final authority, my friend. They are going to enforce a specific day of worship. And when I say they, I'm talking about the people at the top who are ruling this world, pulling the strings. And listen to me carefully, please. Not all of them are actually people. The Bible is clear that we are not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Now, it's interesting to me, this is a non-Adventist who is saying they are going to enforce a day of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And people's eyes are being opened to the truth, that there is something going on. And as Adventists, we've long expected Catholics and Protestants to really come together. And when I find an example of that, I think one of the big examples we've seen here recently is the Heritage Foundation.
Right.
And Michael Knowles coming. Now, he said several different things. We got to unpack this interview here in just a little bit. But let's take a look and analyze this next claim. Some of the claims by Michael Knowles, a Catholic discussion with the Heritage Foundation.
So much even of the criticism of the founding is irretrievably liberal and individualist. A lot of that comes much, much later. To your point, when the First Amendment is ratified, we had established churches in the colonies, many of the colonies. They persisted for quite a while after the ratification. And really, you only get the hyper-individualist read after the 14th Amendment.
Yes.
So this comes much, much later. Don't blame John Adams for that.
Right.
Don't blame Madison.
Did you catch that? He's like, this idea of the First Amendment was like much later.
Yep.
And almost as if, that wasn't consistent with what the founders actually thought. And he names Madison, of all people. I just wonder, is he really counting on the ignorance of his viewer? James Madison's the very one who said the number, industry, and morality, the priesthood, and the devotion of the people have been manifestly increased by the total separation of the church from the state. So he's speaking about separation of church and state, and we're supposed to not blame Madison for that because that's...
Yeah, when you have a founding father, writing the term there, separation of church and state, and then current politicians trying to divorce themselves from that notion. Right. But the problem is that, Knowles here, he's Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And so his worldview is shaped by that Catholicism. I think of another prominent Catholic voice online that was quoting a pope saying that the notion that the church should be separated from the state is heretical.
This is from 1864. It's Pope Pius IX. He wrote a document called the Syllabus of Errors. All right. He listed things that were erroneous, that were bad, and he condemned them. Here is one of the propositions, Proposition 55, that was condemned by the Pope. Quote, right on the screen. Quote, the church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the church, end quote. This proposition was condemned as heretical. All right, so if you make this proposition, that is condemned, that is anathema, that is heretical. If you are a Catholic, you cannot say this, and I quote, the church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the church. What is Pope Pius IX teaching us? He's teaching us that there is a true integration of the church and of the state. So the church has the vocation, the call, and the graces to elevate the state. It can call the state to have a Catholic understanding of matrimony, of family, of adoption, of laws, of just war, of usury. And this is exactly what should happen. And in successful Catholic countries, Christian countries, historical, that is what happened. Were there abuses? Yes. Guess what? Humans and their concupiscence from original sin kicks in. People submit to evil. But the proper arrangement is the Catholic one, and that is an integration of church and state, state in its lane, church in its lane, but integrated.
Yeah, well, and let's take a look here, of course, over at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, we had the speaker saying something interesting here. Let's take a look.
I'm often criticized for invoking my faith, but I remind people that's not some innovative thing. It's what previous generations did. When I go to the little chapel right outside the speaker's office in the Capitol to pray, they mock me for that. There are some very angry voices out there trying to convince us breathlessly that there must be a rigid separation between church and state. It's a phrase that's often repeated, as we know, but very rarely understood. That phrase, as you all know, derives from not the Constitution, but a personal letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Association. And in that letter, he explained that because, quote, religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, the First Amendment is a vital safeguard for our rights of conscience. Jefferson wrote that he revered that act of the American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Now they take that phrase and they turn it around. Jefferson clearly did not mean that wall to keep religion from influencing our government and public life. To the contrary, the founders wanted to protect the church and the religious practice of citizens from an encroaching state, not the other way around. Our founders understood that a free society and a healthy republic depend upon religious and moral virtue, not only because these things help prevent the abuse of power, but also because those convictions make it possible to preserve our essential freedoms.
See, but what they don't understand here is that what he's just talking about, where, the church is supposed to influence the state, but not the state influence the church. That's what we're aiming for here. What he's failing to see is that this is one big circle, and you can't actually stop it halfway through the circle. The circle goes all the way around.
I kind of liked how the way Scott Ritzema put it. He says, House Speaker, and he's a little tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but House Speaker says that the beast shouldn't ride the woman should ride the beast. Reckoning back to Revelation 17. But, I can think of no better example as to why they should be separate than the rhetoric that we're finding right here. This came from William Wolfe, and William Wolfe was a senior official in the Trump administration as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the Pentagon and Director of Legislative Affairs at the Department of State. Let's take a look. And by the way, prior to his service in the administration, he worked for the Heritage Action for America. Let's see what he said here in a recent sermon.
We should not blink. We should not hesitate to tell people, not because we are so wise, not because we made the rules of the world. We didn't. We humbly submit to how God made the rules of the world, and we say, this is how we should order our lives together. And frankly, yes, we are going to impose it upon you. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but this is good and right and just if it lines up with God's standards. And I am going to enforce my morality on you in as much as our morality is God's morality. And you should always check yourselves. Again, I'm not trying to puff you up. Check yourself. Do I believe what God believes? Am I defending what God says is good? And if it is, then you should have the courage to say, this is how we're going to run our town. This is how we're going to run our county. This is how we're going to run our state. And this is how we should run the United States of America by legislating the morality that we can find in the Bible.
But the question I'd have is, has he checked himself against the Ten Commandments? Which day is he keeping sacred? Is he keeping the seventh day sacred, or is he keeping man's tradition?
That's very true. And I think the danger to this is we've seen Catholicism mobilizing here lately. Of course, they are known for legislating the tradition of men, but let's take a look and see some of the movements that they're taking place.
As our nation prepares to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I invite you to join me in a year of fervent prayer for the United States of America. From the beginning, our homeland was entrusted to the providential care of Almighty God, and the truths of its founding affirm that liberty is His gift, and that our lasting home is His eternal kingdom. Today, we witness many wounds in our nation. We see attacks upon innocent human life, upon marriage and the family, upon our identity as children of God, and upon the free practice of our holy faith. For this reason, I ask you to unite your heart with mine in the national prayer for the United States of America, imploring the Sacred Heart of Jesus to purify our nation and to bless it anew. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patroness of the Americas, let us beg God to restore our country in truth, justice, and peace. I invite you to pray this prayer each day throughout the year 2026. May the Sacred Heart of Jesus reign in our homes and in our nation. May His truth and His love triumph in America, now and forever. Amen.
Well, they're getting ready, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, speaking of how they're getting ready, I found that there's some training seminars, it looks like, or training videos or just content that's being produced by the Diocese of Knoxville, just a little ways north of here.
Yeah.
And let's see what the focus is up there at the Diocese of Knoxville.
It is the key holy day. It's the most important day of the year. So minimally for us Catholics to celebrate or to be at the Eucharist and to participate, that is the preeminent way that we make the Lord's Day holy. Now, you all don't live in a time that I grew up in. When I was a child and a teenager, still at that point in the South, we had these things called the Blue Laws. Have you heard of those? So in those days, it was required by state law that nothing could open on Sundays. So literally, Saturday night at 9 o'clock in Lawrenceburg, the last little markets shut down, and on Sunday, nothing was open. I mean, you could occasionally find a gas station where you could pump gas, but I mean, most of the city was shut down. What did that mean? It meant that that day was different than all the other days of the week. And there's something really good about that. And I know that our world has changed, but I would encourage all of you to think about ways that you can make that day of the week different than every other day. It was interesting. I was on my way to a retreat in Colorado one summer, flying on the airplane, and they used to have these magazines, airplane magazines, in the seat backs in front of you. And I pulled it out, and the cover article was by a Jewish family, and they'd kind of become secularized, but they wrote, "The joy of rediscovering the Sabbath." And what they decided to do as a family was they decided on their Sabbath day, which is Saturday, that no one in the family would do anything that was burdensome or like work. So if cutting grass in their yard was work-related, they didn't do that on Sunday. But if they worked at a desk all week and they loved cutting grass, that was considered a way of enjoying the Creator and being with the Creator outside. So they determined that everything they did on Saturdays would be a day of joy. The mother didn't like cooking, so all the meals were prepared on Friday evening. When the Sabbath began, she didn't have to cook. They would go to the museums, they would go to the parks, they would take hikes. When we were kids, since everything was closed, we'd go to Mass on Sunday. We'd usually go home after Mass. Sometimes we would get in the car and drive around the county just to kind of drive it around. And we'd drive by a relative's house, an aunt or uncle, stop by and visit. And then we always ended up on Sunday evening at my grandmother's house, and she always cooked a big dinner for us, and we watched The Wonderful World of Disney and Wild Animal Kingdom, whatever it was. We had our favorite TV programs as kids, and then we ate dinner with Grandma and Grandpa. So,
one thing I think about here is even his description of how to keep the Sabbath is a little bit flawed, because he's not just talking about the wrong day. He's talking about this Jewish family, right? Well, he says like, well, if they worked at a desk job, it would be fine to go out and mow the grass, Well, what does the Bible actually say? It says not to do any work.
Yeah.
Okay. We also read Isaiah 58:13, if thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thy own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. Then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. So there's this notion that we find in Scripture where it's not just about, just have a day off and do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
It's specifically supposed to be spending time with God.
Yes.
Now, if you're out there mowing your lawn because you really enjoy it, and then you're watching Disney in the evening, is that really honoring God's Sabbath? I don't think it is.
Yeah.
So I think even their notion of how they're keeping the Sabbath, and I get that they're trying to draw an attempt here and say, and kind of glorify this in people's minds, but I still think it's the wrong notion.
Yeah. And, of course, the question here really comes down to, should the state actually legislate morality at all? And that's the big push that a lot of Christian nationalists and movers and shakers are going. Ellen White had some counsel on this, that the American Sentinel had published the truth for this time. And what I find interesting in the American Sentinel, and remember, this was put out by some of the champions for religious liberty at that time period. You had Alonzo Jones, who had gone before the Labor Committee. And one of the things that was pointed out was, says the American Sentinel, morality is a matter which from its original nature and object lies entirely beyond the reach and control of the state proper. Then we are to understand that all police regulations looking to the moral welfare of the community are wrong and illegal. Now, this was the Independent criticizing, of course, a statement in the Sentinel. But it was true, because notice the argument in the American Sentinel, but only let that man's hatred lead him to attempt to do an injury to his neighbor, and the state will punish him. Only let his covetousness lead him to lay hands on that which is not his in an attempt to steal, and the state will punish him. Only let his impure mind lead him to attempt violence to any woman, and the state will punish him. Yet bear in mind, the state does not punish him even then for his immorality, but for his incivility. The state punishes no man because he is immoral, but because he is uncivil. It cannot punish immorality, it must punish incivility. And the reason for this being is that morality, what is owed God, reaches into your very thoughts and intentions, something that the state can never read. And the only way that the state can even try to read that is through inquisition. So when the state begins to legislate morality, it requires, of necessity, to actually implement inquisition.
See, but this is a very important point that I think a lot of even Adventists don't fully understand the point that we're trying to make here.
Yeah.
It's not that God's laws, they can't be legislated. The outward obedience certainly can be legislated. Does that mean that if your state is voting on whether or not to allow adultery, to have brothels, for example, does that mean that you should vote no? Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Does that mean that we should ban any form of outward breaking of the last 6 commandments? I believe so.
Yeah.
Okay. Murder. Yeah, that's wrong. Okay. Breaking oath, in the courtroom, that's punishable, right?
Yes. So notice how Romans 13, when it speaks about the role of the state, it mentions love to your neighbor, but it never actually opens the door for the state to punish the first table of the law, because that's up for God to judge, not up to the state to do. Now, the state's tried in times past, and we find some interesting examples of that. I've been scouring through additional newspapers, because I know a while back you had collected a bunch as well, and we found some stories here in the Atlantic Constitution about individuals here. And, it's interesting. There's this individual, Brother Conklin of Michigan, who with his family had lately moved into this neighborhood, has been reported to the grand jury, and a bill found against him for working on Sunday, and all he did was to build a fire. Just what I've seen many other doing since I came to the state. The penalty for violating any portion of the law in the state is very severe. They have what is known in the state as the chain gang, where those who violate the law are taken in a ball and chain fastened to one leg, and they're made to work on public roads and railroads. And those who are put there Are many of them treated worse than brutes? Many have been whipped to death, and doubtless if he should be taken there for working on Sunday, he would be compelled to work on Sunday or whipped. What is your advice? Should we be beaten in the circuit court? Would you take the case to the Supreme Court? And if so, can you help us? We are all poor here. So, it's interesting that there were individuals who had suffered death as a result. We find additional stories in the Huntsville Gazette of Adolphus Callicott, a Seventh-day Adventist who was on the 20th convicted in the criminal court of Dyer County, Tennessee, of working on Sunday. You have another story here in Dayton, Tennessee, in Ray County, of individuals being charged. Here's another one in Ontario for working in the Victoria Daily Times. I've got the Middleton Transcript, fined for Sunday work, or the Decatur Morning Review. We have another one here from the Sedalia Evening Democrat. So it's interesting that there was a lot of people that were arrested for this, and this is the direction that they're wanting to bring it back. Now, of course, we know who's pushing behind this. It's Rome, ultimately. It's their day. So I just want to play a little bit more about how they're intending to do this, because some people over the years have said, the Constitution would never allow this, right? Obviously, it took place in the late 19th century. But let's hear a little bit more some of the statements that what we heard here at the Heritage Foundation from Michael Knowles, because I think it really showcases what they're going to do to the Constitution.
In the 250th anniversary, it's kind of funny that we're talking about Catholicism, because the men who founded the country are rolling over in their graves at the very thought of that, including some, despite my swarthy appearance, on my father's side, I am a WASP, and they would have disowned me for it. But that doesn't really matter. The fact is that the government that they established is very closely, if not identical, it's very closely in accord with the ideal regime laid out by St. Thomas in the Summa Theologiae, and also in De Regno, in which he outlines the times in which a people can overthrow a tyrant. In certain circumstances, it's permissible. And he says the best regime is a regime that has a kingly aspect, a monarchical aspect, an aristocratic aspect, and a democratic aspect. In liberal modernity, we pretend that only democracy is legitimate. Kim Jong-un was just reelected with 99.93% of the vote 2 days ago. So we really believe even the North Koreans have to be Democrats now. But that isn't the real idea. And so obviously the real idea goes back to antiquity. Polybius explains it well, which is that good government is government that is for the common good. And bad government is government that is only for private interest. So you can have a good monarchy, a good aristocracy, a good democracy, and the bad versions are tyranny or oligarchy or mob rule.
Now I have some questions. Was the United States really founded upon the principles of Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologia?
No.
I mean, Thomas Aquinas was the one who proposed the death penalty for heresy. Okay? And then I have to ask myself, wait a second, a monarchy? Were we founded as a nation upon having kings?
Nope. Not at all.
I mean, Washington refused that back in the day. The entire purpose of the United States was to flee the tyranny under a monarchy over in Europe, and to be founded upon a constitutional republic, not a democracy, but a constitutional republic. But you know what? Constituted liberty is what Rome hated. In Quanta Cura, it was called insanity.
But it's funny how this is repeating the same error that the Jews had. Because he's sitting here talking about the best for society, what's the greater good, okay? What's going to serve the greatest number of people? I think of John 11 verse 50. Nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. So they were literally believing, well, it's better that one person die than. It's for the good of the nation.
Yeah, the common good.
The common good.
To kill Christ for the common good.
Right. And so he's literally promoting the same thing that crucified Christ.
Yeah, exactly. But notice, we were warned that every principle of the Constitution that's made our nation a Protestant republic would be repudiated. Let's hear how they're going to do it.
I'm wondering if you have any sense if there would be a way, or maybe it's already happening, to recover something of this natural law tradition in which something like universal moral laws and the existence of a creator are treated as public rather than sectarian truth.
Certainly. Look, there's a desire for that is quite pronounced. I think you especially see that among some millennials and Zoomers. They recognize that the craziness reached its apotheosis during transgenderism. That's why conservatives talked about it for years on end. And the left talked about it for years on end. That was the extreme of voluntarist politics, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, the insistence that our tyrannical wills will reshape reality, and people realized that idea was wanting. So I think there's clearly a desire to return to something like objective reality, metaphysical realism, the natural law. You see this reflected in the conversions of Zoomers in particular, especially the brainy Zoomers, especially the ambitious Zoomers. It doesn't have to be a population-wide phenomenon to create massive cultural downstream effects that we'll be seeing for decades. That's all there. There is a real desire for it. Now, how that is effected, I think, depends upon how we interpret the American founding. And so interpretation here is really key. There are some people who insist that the founding is just, irretrievably Protestant and liberal, and we just have to toss the whole thing out. And it's not
among our fellow Catholic conservatives, to be clear.
It's not just Protestants and liberals saying that. Frankly, it's maybe more the Catholics who are saying that. And I think, well, look, I'm not persuaded by that fact. Even if I were, I'm not sure I would say it out loud. But we don't have to be. And this, look, we're in the room at the Heritage Foundation, so we can get a little weird and esoteric, I guess. I was thinking about this from the perspective of semiotics, which is how are we even to interpret anything, but how are we to interpret the American founding? And I'm brought to the work of the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, one of the fathers of semiotics, who is reading Jean Poinsot, John of St. Thomas, who himself is faithfully reading Thomas Aquinas, providentially or coincidentally. And Peirce's idea, drawing on Jean Poinsot, is that we interpret signs in a triadic relationship. So there is the sign vehicle, like the red light, there's the object of the sign, whatever the red light is pointing to. And that's where a lot of the liberal semiotics, left-wing semiotics, ends, a dyadic relationship. No, what Peirce and Poinsot are pointing out is that there's actually a triadic relationship. There's this third part, which is the action of the mind, of the interpretant. And so in the case of the red light means stop. So it means we have to stop, right? Well, not really, not when I'm driving. Let's use the yellow light, that's a better example. Some people would see the yellow light, they'd slow down, not me. I see the yellow light, I say I must speed up. There's something, the meaning is different for me and for a granny who's driving her, Lexus down the road. And so in this way, when we interpret the American founding, we can totally grant that these men were not endeavoring to establish a Catholic republic or anything like it. Yes, But we can recognize that what they have done has created a meaning that is very much in line with the natural law tradition, with the Thomistic tradition, scholastic tradition, and so we're not stretching the meaning of our nation beyond the bounds of reason.
So basically, he's saying you can interpret this how you see fit.
Yeah, exactly.
What a relativistic way of viewing.
Going down the exact direction that he just got done trying to distance himself from.
Yes.
He's trying to go after all these liberals who are, avoiding objective reality.
Yes.
And here he goes down avoiding objective reality himself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and it's interesting to me because if you go back, he's right in a sense that this was very much Thomistic tradition because it was Thomas Aquinas who had talked about principles of the Decalogue and that they admit of change. And so if they admit of change, it opens the door to have a vicar come in and define for you what the change actually is.
Right.
It allows man to step in there and say, but I'm going to interpret it this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by that tradition, then, the law of God is nullified and made void. And that's really the direction. Again, you can basically turn the Constitution of the United States into a waxen nose and bend it whichever way you want.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really open to interpretation at that point.
So much so, and this is the really sad truth of the matter, is that Protestants have been gotten so blinded. We have a medal of the St. Bartholomew's Massacre in our collection.
Yeah.
But now the Pope, or the leader of the organization who committed that atrocity, is being given a medal coming up. Let's take a look.
And the Pope is making a virtual visit to the U.S. to receive the National Constitution Center's Liberty Medal, honoring his commitment to religious freedom around the world. He will be recognized during a public ceremony on July 3rd, the day before the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. He will deliver his acceptance remarks live from the Vatican to those gathered on Independence Mall in Philadelphia.
So, it's fascinating to me that we're giving the Pope this medal when there's a history of Inquisition, massacre, and the individual before Pope Leo XIV, Leo XIII, was the one who stated the equal toleration of all religions is the same as atheism.
Yeah.
Now, remember, Leo XIV actually got his name or
took
chose
his name from Leo XIII.
From Leo
yeah.
XIII.
Yeah.
Now, just a quick word of context here. This particular medal image here is AI generated on that particular medal image there.
You're just using this to illustrate the point.
This is just illustrative right here. But nevertheless, that's what's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, another thing that we've seen here recently is a guest who we had on this discussion commented here recently on something that's going to happen potentially here in the near future. I just want to hear Douglas Wilson's recent remarks about a hypothetical republic. What's next for America?
Now, when someone argues for Christian nationalism, as I certainly have been doing, there comes with this a moral obligation to answer the resultant questions. If I believe that an ideal form of government would be a Protestant republic, as I do, then it is incumbent on me to define and explain what I would propose to do with any religious minorities were such a republic to be established. It is intellectually dishonest to be coy and pretend that there are no issues like this to be addressed. This is not the same thing as proposing legislation that will deal with those groups in a completely different context starting this coming fall. John Popola and I were talking about a hypothetical situation centuries from now in order to weigh the principles involved.
So he's talking about religious minorities and mentions seemingly kind of let it slip.
In passing, right?
In passing.
Yeah.
Legislation this fall.
Yeah.
Where's he getting that?
Yeah.
He was recently at the Pentagon, and he was giving a speech there, and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was there with him. And so this isn't just some random person. I mean, he clearly has the ear very high up in government. So when he lets something slip, like piece of legislation dealing with those minorities coming this fall, what legislation?
Yeah.
What legislation is mentioned there?
Yeah. That's a big question right there. I mean, this is the fellow who's sitting down with CNN, Tucker Carlson, and the same church as Hegseth, right?
Yeah.
So
he's the pastor.
Right. And so, what legislation? Well, thankfully, when it comes to knowing what's going to happen in the future, the Word of God gives us details on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the message that we have to give to the world is to come out of Babylon, lest ye partake of her plagues. Because the reality is that we know that legislation is coming that will target those who stand for truth. But what the Bible reveals is what's coming after that. And that would be the 7 last plagues. The 7 last plagues are God's answer to what the wicked desire.
Yeah.
When they desire to slay the blood of God's tender children, slay the saints of God's tender children, and God will ultimately give them blood to drink. If they desire to worship the sun on Sunday, God will give them the scorching sun.
And then blackness.
Yeah, and then darkness. And then ultimately, there will be another, it is finished, or it is done.
Yeah.
And Christ will come again to claim his children, his true children who have not received the mark of the beast and who obey and keep the commandments of God.
But, we've had a lot of discussion about this Iran conflict and where do we think that is headed. And I think one of the things that we know is that these wars and rumors of wars, I think ultimately it has to go towards a system of control. And how do we do that? Well, we've seen the price of gas going up. We've seen how the price per barrel has shot up tremendously. I think that one of the things that is poignant is in Ellen White's writings, she talks about in India, China, Russia, and the cities of America, thousands of men and women were dying of starvation. And that the moneyed men would buy up all the food and then would sell at greatly increased prices. Well, this is essentially, when we see oil prices rising like this, part of me has to wonder, with the Middle East basically being taken out of the loop of fuel production, Russia produces a lot of fuel and the U.S. produces a lot of fuel.
Well, it's not only that, but all the natural gas that comes is used heavily in fertilizer. Mm-hmm. And so if you don't have all of the necessary fertilizer, what's going to happen at the other end of that?
Right.
Famine.
Right, yeah. And war a lot of times brings famine.
Yeah.
And so, there's been discussion about what is going to happen if Iran hits some of these desalination plants over there in the Middle East. What is going to happen if the United States decides to attack some of the power plants that are over there? We don't know. Take a look at this post that was on social media right here and watch what the U.S. Department of War is posting.
Dear gracious God, I need you. Now more than ever before, I need you, for I realize how great is my task and how meager are my resources. Give me wisdom, I pray. When demands press in on every side, give me accurate eyes that can separate the important from the urgent, the fundamental from the incidental. Give me wisdom, I pray. When I ache for my soldiers' friendship, give me courage to earn their respect and obedience. Give me wisdom, I pray. When time and task pull in different directions, grant me clarity to see the way and peace to calm those around me. Give me wisdom, I pray. When decisions are demanded, may my walk match my talk. Remind me daily that the speed of a leader is the speed of the team. Give me wisdom, I pray. When my authority is tested, show me when to raise my voice and when to lower it, when to use the carrot and when to use the stick. Give me wisdom, I pray. When my time is done, may I be remembered as a leader who encouraged, not discouraged, as a man who built people up, not tore them down. Give me wisdom, I pray. When in victory, keep me humble. When in defeat, keep me from despair. Compensate my weaknesses, accentuate my strengths, mold me into the man you want me to be. Give me wisdom, I pray. And most of all, please keep my soldiers safe. Lead them, guide them, protect them, watch over them. And as you gave all of yourself for me, help me to give all of myself for them. And it is in your name we pray. Amen.
So it's just interesting to see this continued rhetoric push, which is basically prayer mingled with U.S. Department of War videos. I think that it speaks volumes about where this government is going. But we also saw one of our congressmen here from Tennessee actually post another video on Truth, or not on Truth Social, but on X. And take a look at this clip right here from Congressman Andy Ogle. What are they wearing there?
Crusader crosses.
And so where does that tell us we are if they're showing Crusader crosses?
Well, I mean, they view this as a holy war, ultimately. Mm-hmm. That's the direction. And of course, church and state came together. Roman Catholicism, that was one of the big things that motivated the Crusades.
Yeah.
And it's all a battle over, the Middle East and a false view of Bible prophecy that takes the intention entirely off of the real Antichrist.
Yeah.
And I think that's Satan's big deception at the end of time.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, the Bible reveals the truth, and God's people will know the difference.
Mm-hmm. We know that there's going to be deceptions in the last days, but it says that if it were possible to deceive the very elect, Do you think it's actually going to be possible? I don't believe so.
No.
I believe that God's people are going to be listening to his voice, and they are going to be true to him all the way until the end.
Amen. I just want to give a quick shout out for those of you who are joining us in warning about what's coming to this world. Check out BibleWorld.ai. It is a great resource that has the all kinds of image generation tools, and it's an Adventist resource.
Well, there's always going to be more information coming down the pipeline, and I think that we're going to have to do updates more frequently because there's things happening at such a rapid pace that we need to be ready.
Amen.
We need to understand where we are in the stream of time, and we need to warn our friends and our neighbors. And in regards to doing that, one of the things that this ministry has been doing is we are traveling a lot, actually, and we're going and speaking at a number of different churches. We're not just doing a conference like what you saw at the beginning of this video. We're also going and speaking at churches. If you're interested in reaching out to us to put on a program or to speak at your church, make sure you reach out to us at heritageandhope.org. So that you can send us a message. We would love to hear from you, and we have a media packet that you can look at. It's a PDF that you can go through, and it talks about how we go and speak at churches and bring some of our old books with us when we travel, especially when it's more local. But we would be glad to come and worship with you, and we would be glad to come and share the three angels message and give a prophecy update at your church as well. Thank you so much for joining us for this Sunday Law Update. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can stay up to date because we have a lot of exciting videos coming soon. God bless. Thanks so much.